Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. We are gathered here today in tribute to Terence McKenna. This is the final fireside chat of a 3-week series. It's been incredible. Let me know where you're tuning in from if you want to comment in the chat box on the bottom of the screen. We'd love to see where you're all coming in from. It seems like we've had an amazing international reach in the last while. Let's see. All right, so we've got people from San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Atlanta, Georgia, Ortiz Island. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Genevieve Wood. I am a team member of the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, and this event is brought to you by the McKenna Academy and the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. The McKenna Academy explores the McKenna Academy explores modern and traditional practices, ideas, and technologies that foster the understanding of nature and the cosmos. The San Francisco Psychedelic Society is devoted to the exploration of entheogens and the expansion of consciousness through providing education, community integration, and support. We are so happy to offer this final fireside chat to you. I'm going to give just a bit of a layout of the room for anyone who is new to Crowdcast. Again, you'll see the chat bar that is on the bottom right of your screen if you're on desktop. Feel free to connect with the community there. Also, you're welcome to share this with your friends on social media. You should see a share button. We'd love it if you could spread the word. This is a free talk, and the replays will be free as well for this and all of the other fireside chats. There's also, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a green button that says submit your favorites of Terence. And we'd love to hear what are the impactful moments or offerings of Terence that have really touched your lives, as far as be they quotes or links to a talk, or if you are an artist and you've created a piece of art or mixed a piece of music that relates to Terence, please submit those. We'll be sharing those on the McKenna Academy social media and website channels. And there's also a poll at the bottom you'll see too. We'd love to hear your feedback on what kind of future offerings you'd like in educational, mind expanding, if you'd like one-day classes or longer courses. So let us know. What else do we want to go through? I think we'll go through a recap of this series. So April 3rd was the 20th anniversary of Terence's passing, and we opened up this series with a premiere viewing of a talk that Terence gave at Esalen in 1989, followed by a potent opening discussion between Eric Davis and Dennis McKenna. The following day, on April 4th, we welcomed Bruce Damer, followed by Luis Eduardo Luna in conversation, both of them with Dennis McKenna. And it was amazing just to go through both their history and their memories of Terence, as well as really carrying forth his message on into the world of today. The following Saturday, April 11th, we welcomed in Paul Stamets and Wade Davis, who, in conversation with Dennis McKenna again, who both had really amazing contributions to how can we carry forth this legacy? How can we be responsible members of this planet in today's world? And so we've got, let's see, thanks, while I get all of this together, we've got a really amazing and very special conversation happening today. Rather than two separate fireside chats, we're going to have one conversation with Dennis McKenna, Rupert Sheldrake, and Ralph Abraham. Ralph Abraham and Rupert Sheldrake and Terence McKenna were part of the Trialogues at Esalen, which spanned from 1989 until 1998, I believe, and an amazing series of dynamic conversations. And so they will be here sharing their memories with Terence, and also their contributions again to today's world. So let me just go over the schedule with you real briefly. I think we'll have an hour-long fireside chat with the three of them, and then we're going to move into a 30-minute Q&A period, followed by breakout sessions. I'll explain after the Q&A how to enter the breakout sessions. You'll see at the bottom of the screen that there is an Ask a Question button. So this is where you would submit your questions for that Q&A section. And make sure you upvote questions as well. That's a great function on here. We'll be answering questions based on relevance and the amount of votes that they have. So we'd love to hear which questions you'd want answered. And let me, without further ado, welcome Dennis McKenna. Dennis McKenna is a renowned ethnopharmacologist focused on the study of hallucinogenic plants. He is the principal founder of the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, a founding board member at Hefter Research Institute. He was also a key organizer in the Ayahuasca Project. He organized the ESPD 50 conference in 2017. And his work has been foundational in the scientific exploration of ayahuasca as well as many other realms. So I will bring you on now, Dennis.
Hi, good afternoon. Hi, Genevieve. Thank you for that great introduction. And hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to see so many people tuning in for this. This is our last installment in this series, but the response has been amazing. I can believe because I'm seeing it, but there is still a very active community of people connected with Terence and his ideas and that whole sphere. So if he's looking down from hyperspace or out of whatever portal he looks, I think he would be very pleased to see these events. And there have been several helpful messages coming by in the text box about how to watch all of these events online. They're all still there and they'll stay up there for a while. I don't know how long. But anyway, today, our last installment in the series, I'm very pleased to invite two of Terence's oldest and best friends, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake and Dr. Ralph Abraham. And these two gentlemen have very generously agreed to spend some time with us. And their relationship with Terence stems from the late 80s, and they've done numerous events together. Notably, these Trialogues at the Edge of the West, which they participated in at Esalen on a couple of occasions, and two books at least have resulted from this. One was The Evolutionary Mind, the other Chaos, Creativity, and Cosmos, I believe it was. So you can find those on Amazon or on Rupert Sheldrake's website, which I see someone just helpfully put the link there. So I want to give a brief introduction and then we'll get on with it. So Dr. Rupert Sheldrake is a plant scientist and a developmental biologist. He's widely known for his controversial theories around morphic resonance and its role in nature. In the mid-90s, with his colleagues Ralph and Terence, he participated in a series of trialogues at Esalen Institute that became known as Trialogues at the Edge of the West. And these conversations were memorialized in two books, Chaos, Creativity, and Cosmic Consciousness, and The Evolutionary Mind, Conversations on Science, Imagination, and Spirit. So it's a pleasure to welcome Rupert. And Ralph, I will also give an introduction. He is a mathematician, well known for his contributions to dynamical systems theory and chaos theory. He is professor of mathematics at the University of California, Santa Cruz since 1968. In 1975, he founded the Visual Math Institute at UC Santa Cruz, and he was a participant in these Esalen trialogues with Rupert Sheldrake and Terence. So in this last installment, we'll reflect on those trialogues and tell stories. So welcome, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to sign off for the time being, and we very much look forward to your conversation.
Okay. Everybody can hear?
Yes.
All right. All
Yes.
right. All right. Well, how would you like to start off? You have any thoughts about that you would like to begin with, or shall we just we have some talking points, but what do you want to say?
Well, maybe I should give a little background. We started our conversations actually in 1982,
Okay.
which is when I first met Ralph and Terence. My book, A New Science of Life, had just been published in California, and I'd gone to California for its publication in Los Angeles for the first time. I'd never been to California before. It was a wonder world. I'd spent the previous years living and working in India, and I was quite unprepared for what I found in California. It was a ferment of intellectual activity at the time. And I spent several weeks in San Francisco, and a friend there said to me, there's this guy you've got to meet called Terence McKenna. And he said, would you like to do that? And I said, well, if you think so, yes. He said, well, I'll fix it up. And then he said to me, this is a Walkman. It's got a cassette of a talk by Terence. I'm going to lend it to you to listen to on the Greyhound bus. You take a Greyhound bus from the Greyhound bus terminal to Santa Rosa, and Terence will meet you by the bus stand. So I took the bus. I got to Santa Rosa. I waited by the curbside, not knowing what to expect, knowing almost nothing about Terence except this talk I'd listened to on DMT and its remarkable effects. I'd never heard of DMT before. And then, to my surprise, a battered gold-colored Cadillac with enormous tail fins drew up, and the windows scrolled down, and this bearded figure in dark glasses sort of leaned out through the window and said, "Dr. Sheldrake, I presume." And it was Terence, and I jumped in the car, and Ralph was there, and we started talking, and we were talking for days after that, and we met up every year to have these conversations. We sometimes did them at Esalen, sometimes in California. We had conversations in England, in Hawaii, at Terence's Botanic Garden. And I think it was 1989 that Nancy Lunny at Esalen asked us to do a public event. The previous ones between 1982 and 1989 were unrecorded. After that, most of our conversations were recorded, and not all were in public, most were not. But all those trialogues were discovered by Ralph. He discovered a dusty box of cassettes and a few years ago, and they're now all online on various websites, including my own. So there's a lot of material now from these trialogues from 1989 onwards.
So these trialogues are actually online somewhere. One can listen to them?
Oh, dozens of them, yes.
Oh, really? Okay. I guess through Esalen or your website, they can find these.
They're on my website. There's a section called the Trialogues, and there's, I've forgotten how many, 25, 30 trialogues, something like that. And there's a summary of each trialogue, so you can actually see what it's about before you listen to it and decide if you want to listen or not. They're all audio. There are 3 videos from Esalen, which are also online, but primarily they're in audio.
Okay.
Some of them are in our books that you mentioned, but a lot of them are not. So there's a lot of material there for anyone who's interested that you can just listen to it online.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Thank you. And it's www.sheldrake.org, right?
That's right.
All
yes.
Stuff will be there. So, Ralph, tell us a little bit about how you came to know Terence. I guess you knew him before Rupert met him, but not that much before. Is that right?
It was about 10 years. Yes. I might start in Princeton, where I was a professor and encountered LSD for the first time in 1967. It was under the influence of LSD and the I Ching, I decided to move to Santa Cruz. And Santa Cruz at that time was a kind of hub, a worldwide hub of hip culture. So then I went to India, and when I returned, I was hanging out on a street corner, and one of the hip friends picked me up and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." This was on the corner in front of the main post office of Santa Cruz. So he drove me then about 2 hours, to Terence's house in Berkeley and said, this is where you're going. Get out and go in the front door and go up the stairs. So I did that, and I met Terence, and we started talking then, and basically never stopped. So we had established a dialogue pattern for 10 years through regular visits that I made to his house in Sebastopol. And our subjects were largely about consciousness, Gnosticism, psychedelics, and so on. On our first meeting at the top of the stairs, he showed me a little dish with the Stropharia cubensis Earl growing in it. And we had our first discussion was about his idea that the mushroom spore was a visitor from space, sent to colonize the Earth, and that we were helping out with our assistance. There would be a major biological and social transformation on planet Earth. So that's the background. When we met, I think Terence and you, Dennis, had recently returned from La Chorrera. So those La Chorrera revelations expressed so well in your joint book, The Invisible Landscape, Mind Hallucinogens, and the I Ching.
And the I Ching, right.
Yes. And Terence and I talked a lot about the I Ching, and I recognized that his mathematical method of approaching the King Wen series was actually a mathematical technique in chaos theory that is used to develop a geometric picture from the chaotic behavior of a dynamical system. And so it was on one of these visits to Terence and Kat's house in Sebastopol. Terence let me know that Rupert was arriving. And we met, and the trialogue habit began and effortlessly continued. Whenever we met, we would hardly take the time of day or discuss the weather or the climate crisis or whatever, but immediately start trialoguing on our favorite subjects. At that time in 1982, I think there was a distinct, there had to be a change of direction in our trialogues. And that is because Rupert was bringing in his idea of the morphic field, morphic resonance, and so on. So prior to that moment, our ideas, our models for consciousness and the psychedelic experience were largely based on science, on biology, on neurology, and so on. You will see this direction expressed well in that book, The Invisible Landscape. But following Rupert's arrival with his ideas of morphic field, which I personally regarded as a translation into European scientific terms of the intuitions and cosmic models of India, of the classical Sanskrit literature, and so on. So following that in 1982, our trialogues developed more in this direction, away from science as the basic technique of understanding consciousness and the psychedelic experience, and more into the realms of the mystical literature. And that's, I think, what you will find in our literature called the Trialogue Project.
Well, what's happened here? Wait a minute. I don't want that. Sorry, my hearing aids are giving me trouble, so sometimes I can hear and sometimes I can't. But so your acquaintance with Terence, your friendship with Terence began shortly after we returned from La Chorrera. So you've known Terence a bit longer than Rupert. From from the perspective of 40 years on, or whatever, however long it's been, Ralph, what is, how do you view Terence's theory about the time wave now, from your perspective contemporaneously? How do you view it, or can you even comment on that?
Well, I'm sorry to say I was never a big fan of the time wave and the intellectual practice of matching the time wave to a curve of novelty in world cultural history. I think that Terence's historical research, very, very extensive, had produced an interesting graph of novelty in world cultural history. It's a wonderful way of looking at the global consciousness, as it were. And one couldn't deny that there was a conformity between this historical curve and the time wave. The time wave is mathematically and precisely defined by the King-Wen sequence of the I Ching. So where I lost touch with Terence's idea about the time wave was with his idea that it implied a kind of end of time, and his fascination with this object at the end of time. So I thought that time was going to be ongoing throughout my lifetime and beyond, although I couldn't be sure, just as I'm not sure that the world existed before I was born, or even that it exists now. But I lost touch with Terence's ideas at that point. However, I have to say, from the point of view of now, 20 years later, I'm still dubious about the end of time. But a lot of other people I know are obsessed with the idea of the extinction, that we are headed toward an extinction, either of the human population or of the entire biosphere. And indeed, there is a danger of that. I thought there was a danger of this way back at the beginning, at the time of my first acid trip in 1967. I thought, and I still think, that our culture is on a track, it's on a trajectory. It's like a train going down the tracks that can't be moved. It's on a death trip. But I think that we can be saved by a miracle, as many times in the past, when it looked like civilization was on a death track, these times in the past, we were saved by a miracle so that life has gone on. So from the perspective of the time wave, this could be visualized as a kind of a dip down toward the x-axis, and then a bouncing back up again on the basis of a new discovery, a new idea or something. My hopes for the future, and I think this is very well aligned with my conversations with Terence and Rupert. My hope for the future is a miracle that turns the train onto a different track. And this miracle is psychedelics, is entheogens, is this amazing legalization of marijuana and research into psilocybin and ayahuasca and so on. This gives me some hope for the future, that young people, the people who are here now, these two associations supporting this event, I hope that this may be a turning point toward the future in which the biosphere will get yet another chance. Humanity will have the opportunity to join in a partnership with the biosphere and the spiritual realm in producing a future which is a little bit better, even if it might again decline as the time wave periodically does. And again, appear to be on a death track.
Yes, yes. Okay, well, there's a lot to unpack there, but Rupert, how do you view all this 40 years on? What's your perspective? I think, the preoccupation with the end of the world as some sort of continuum rupturing event, which was built into the assumptions of the time wave, perhaps not. It's not really an instrument for predicting that, it turns out. But in some sense, I think Terence's intuition was right, or it's now a meme in the culture. And rightly or wrongly, I think he had, in that sense, I think his intuition was right. Whether the time wave itself measures this is hard to say, but in a broader sense, if you just look at the way things are now, I mean, Terence predicted things are going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and I kind of think he had no idea how weird they were going to get, or maybe he did.
Well, like Ralph, I was always somewhat skeptical of the details of the time wave, and in fact, in some of our trialogues, we teased Terence about it rather. So we were. The bit about it that I liked was its emphasis on the quality of time, that there are times when more new things happen, what he'd call a descent into novelty, and there are times when much more conservative or things seem to go backwards. Now, of course, astrology is another realm of thought which talks about the quality of time. So it's not that quality of time had never been discussed before, but Terence discussed it in a way that was lively, imaginative, often funny. And he spent a lot of time trying to imagine what it would be like at the end of time, a kind of omega point or eschaton, to use his favorite word for it. Sometimes he thought the entire population of the Earth would go on a collective DMT trip. Sometimes he thought it would be that someone had discovered time travel in the future, and everything came recursively back to this particular point in time. He had a number of imaginative ways of trying to imagine what would happen in 2012. None of them actually corresponded to what did happen in 2012, which was not that much, because that was his, of course, date for the end of the time wave.
Right.
So I think that the bit I took from it and was inspired by, and still am, was this idea of descent into novelty, periods when there's an extraordinarily rapid change. And we're in the middle of one at this very moment, with this pandemic, is causing political and economic changes that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. I mean, Greta Thunberg was telling everyone they ought to fly less, but who could have imagined that within a few months, practically no one was flying? I mean, it would have taken millions of Greta Thunbergs to bring about this result. Instead, a virus has done it, the smallest kind of on the very margins of biology. So I thought that Terence's insights, I mean, this was not his only theme, of course, and our conversations are on all sorts of topics. And as you can see in our books or on the online trialogues, we sometimes talked about that. We sometimes talked about millenarianism, which is related to this. Sometimes about biology, sometimes about the ecology of Hawaii. We had a whole range of conversations, sometimes about the cephalopod brain. Terence, how we worked with these trialogues is that we talk about things that we were interested in at the time, and we take turns in leading a trialogue, an introductory talk of topics that we were interested in. For example, there was one, I was interested in homing pigeons and how they home, so we had a trialogue on that. And Ralph was interested in psychedelics and computer graphics, and so each theme was determined according to our actual interests. So the time wave was only a part of that. But of course, it was an enduring part. And one thing, Dennis, I'd like to ask you is I used to tease Terence about the Timewave because I sometimes called him Father McKenna because it was so Catholic, some of his ideas. And when I asked him if he'd ever been an altar boy, and he said he had. And I wanted to ask you about Terence's Catholic childhood. Was he an altar boy, and were you?
Yes, we were both altar boys at various times. I was 4 years younger than he was, so by the time I got into it, he had moved on. He'd already rejected the church, and a few years later, I was not so well. Yeah, I guess you could say rejected the church, and of course, Christianity is very much an apocalyptarian religion. So I think that, that was very influential in Terence's notion about time, that it had to have an end, and his preoccupation with trying to identify a point in the future where it did end and try to imagine what that would have been like. Nothing like the way that Catholicism imagines the Last Judgment, but some kind of end to linear historical time. I think that was the kernel of his ideas. And we were both good Dogans. We were good Catholics, that is, until about age 12, 13, which is about the age that people start to question this kind of thing, or at least rethink it. I remember Terence telling me once that he went to confession once and shared with the priest or something about something he was reading. And I think he would have been about 13 at this time. And the priest said, well, that's on the list of forbidden books that you're not supposed to read. And Terence said, what? There's a list of forbidden books? And immediately went out and found what that was and read all the books. So it was very influential to him in that respect. But neither one of us continued in our faith, and we went through the whole business about interactions with priests because we were in a small town. There was no Catholic school, but there was a summer vacation school, and yes, we were both altar boys at different points. And because we lived close to the Catholic Church, about a block away, we were the ones that were selected to get up at 6 a.m. and go serve weekday mass, of which to an empty church, essentially. The priest, the altar boy, and a couple of older women that kind of looked after the vestry. So that was our experience with Catholicism. But definitely it was influential in creating this expectation. If we could, you mentioned that, I'm sorry, my hearing aids are not working very well. If we could have Terence at the table here in this conversation, if we could do another trialogue in 2020, what do you think the conversation would be about? How do you imagine that might go?
Well, I think Terence would take a great interest in the resurgence of research into psychedelics that's going on at the moment, and indeed into the broader field of consciousness studies, because since Terence passed, there's been a tremendous growth, not only in the scientific study of altered states of consciousness through psychedelics, but also through things like near-death experience, lucid dreaming, and a variety of other altered states of consciousness. And this is leading to an exploration of consciousness which has gone further than when he was alive.
Mhm.
And I think that he'd be particularly, I mean, he's a leading key figure in that whole movement and still is a major influence on this whole movement. I mean, virtually anyone who's interested in psychedelics listens to Terence online, and including lots of young people. And so I would say Terence, talk about speaking from beyond the grave. I mean, Terence is a lesson in how someone can speak from beyond the grave and continue to speak in a way that touches thousands, maybe even millions of people's lives. And I think he's a key ingredient in this whole movement within science. So I think he'd be very interested in it. I mean, it's possible that, he would never be just sort of chugging along at the same speed as everyone else. He'd be out front somewhere. I mean, he was always a pioneering thinker.
Right.
I think he'd be helping to lead the way in this whole field of research, as he did when he was alive.
Well, I think we're all kind of surprised and gratified by the progress in psychedelic research. This is one of the more hopeful things that's going on amid a plethora of not so hopeful things. But this rediscovery of the value of psychedelics as tools for exploring consciousness, it goes way beyond just treatment for mental illnesses, which is also good. The interesting thing, to my mind, is that it seems to be mushrooms that are leading the charge in some ways. And I keep thinking of Terence said once, we're involved in a symbiotic relationship with something that has disguised itself as an alien invasion so as not to alarm us, and effectively that's true. Mushrooms have insinuated themselves into our culture, and a lot of it has to do with the simplicity of the technology that we published together. Any smart 10th grader can figure this out, and many of them did and continue to do so. I think that's had an impact on society, by and large a positive one. What do you think, Ralph?
Well, it seems to me that Terence, has achieved some kind of immortality thanks to YouTube, etc. But amusing and instructive and revolutionary as his ideas are, and delightful his presentation of them, etc., they ceased evolving 20 years ago. And so if Terence had lived, if he were alive today, then we would have seen a further evolution of his thought. The resurgent psychedelics, I think, it's a very good step in a certain direction, but is largely devoted to the medical aspects. And this, of course, might help make psychedelic experience more available to more people. But there's a great problem in understanding your psychedelic experience. So there is now the growth of so-called psychedelic information theory, and the attempt to understand your psychedelic experience, especially if you have repeated experiences which build, like going up a ladder toward a greater and greater penetration of the mysteries of consciousness, of cosmic consciousness, of the school of gurus in the sky, and so on. How can you understand your psychedelic experience? And isn't understanding your psychedelic experience the most important thing in terms of swerving our civilization on its death track onto a new direction? So I think Terence would have been interacting with people who are trying to find better expression, a better way to communicate and share their psychedelic experiences, to build a kind of a hyper literature of cosmic consciousness. And in fact, at the end of his time, Terence was very fascinated by computer graphics, by 3D immersive and so on. That's how he met Bruce Damer. And he influenced Finn to study computer graphics in San Francisco. So meanwhile, computer graphics, 3D immersive, including 3D audio, etc., like the Oculus and so on. This would have fascinated Terence as the opportunity to make an artistic representation of the experience, which had a better chance of communicating with people, a way of sharing and evolving a knowledge of this higher realms, let us say, including morphic fields, morphic resonance, and so on, that go beyond the scientific attempt to understand consciousness. The neurophysiologists, the brain scientists who are busy having conferences called Science and Consciousness all over the planet. I think Terence would be participating in stretching the envelope of this kind of thought in this direction. I don't know what to call it other than PIT, psychedelic information theory.
Yeah, do you think that, I mean, with what's happening with the COVID virus and now all of the things that we used to do in person, like have conferences, are now moving online, do you think that, I mean, I don't know exactly how to put this, but do you think virtual reality technologies and other technologies will eventually supersede psychedelics, or achieving these states through taking a medicine, a molecule? Are there better ways to do that? And what is, do either of you think that maybe psychedelics are a foreshadowing of something different as we develop these I guess you could call them neurotechnologies? Any thoughts on any of that? Or
well, I don't think so myself. I mean, we've been hearing prophetic things about virtual reality for years. In fact, Terence talked about it himself in some of our later trialogues. And I've seen virtual reality displays that supposedly represent psychedelic visions and so on. But I think there's nothing like the total immersion in the actual experience itself. And I think the transformative role of psychedelics for many people is that, especially, say, in early adulthood, is that they fulfill a role as rites of passage for a lot of people. In my recent book, Ways to Go Beyond and Why They Work, I have a chapter on psychedelics in that. And I think that many traditional societies have rites of passage that involve near-death experiences. And I think that the fundamental one in the Western religious tradition was baptism. I think that John the Baptist was a drowner. I think John the Baptist held people under just long enough to induce a near-death experience by drowning. And of course, he may have lost a few, but that was before liability litigation. And I think that there was this they were lining up on the banks of the River Jordan. He was holding them under, perhaps just long enough to induce a near-death experience. They came back and their lives were transformed. And when the early church switched over to infant baptism, but in the ferment of the Reformation, the Anabaptists, who gave rise to Mennonites, Amish, Baptist churches, reinstated baptism by total immersion. And they went around saying they'd died, they'd seen the light, and they'd been born again. Obvious features of a near-death experience. And so I think they were actually doing this. I'm serious about this. I think they were, and that's why they were so transformed and why it was such a powerful rite of passage. And in Stan Grof's researches on LSD in the late 60s and early 70s, where he studied 2,500 people who took it, there was a remarkable number of people who had near-death type experiences, often involving a kind of drowning or constriction, and then coming out into the light through a kind of dark tunnel, like in a near-death experience, which Stan Grof interprets as the archetype of the birth canal. We've all come out through dark tunnels unless we had cesarean births. And I think there's an aspect you see of psychedelic experience that for many people is transformative as a rite of passage. I don't think a virtual reality display could ever bring that about, because you'd have to feel that you really could die for it to work. And health and safety legislation, liability, insurance, etc., would mean that virtual reality wouldn't be able to do that, nor would laboratory studies that have to pass ethics committees to see whether psilocybin will make you less prone to alcohol addiction or depression or whatever. So I think that the way in which they can have this rite of passage aspect happens in shamanic cultures. I think it also happens in psychedelic churches. I mean, Santo Daime, for example, in Brazil, based on ayahuasca as a Christian sacrament. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. It's a hybrid of the Roman Catholic tradition and shamanic ayahuasca taking. And in that context, these altered states of consciousness can have a role as rites of passage, and also a synthesis not only with consciousness studies, consciousness research, virtual reality, but a kind of whole new way of approaching religious imagery, experience, and symbols. And I mean, that's another way. I think what's so interesting about Terence's approach was that he had this rich imaginal realm that was populated by all sorts of entities and beings. It wasn't just personal visions. So there were, he talked about machine elves and other beings that and autonomous entities. We had a trialogue about exactly this, in fact. Again, personally, I think that could possibly be rooted in his childhood imagination. I mean, the Roman Catholic imagination is much, much more rich than the Protestant imagination when it comes to other realms of reality. I mean, Roman Catholics have disembodied saints, miracle working beings, interacting with people living in this world. They have the souls of the departed interacting and being prayed for by people in this world. They're full of angels, and in continental European Baroque Roman Catholic churches, they're full of putti, those little angelic beings with little wings. I mean, they're richly populated realms, denizens of another realm of reality. And that was one of the things that Terence was exploring and to some extent classifying in his explorations. So I think that Terence interfaced not only with the scientific realm, but also with the religious imagination, not just, of course, in the Christian tradition, but in shamanic cultures, where there's all sorts of spirit beings that are accessed through these altered states. And that does take us away from the scientific map. I mean, it might expand it enormously, but it's not simply trying to fit all this into molecular biology or, identifiable health benefits. It's going much more adventurously than that.
Right. Yes, that's interesting. Since as you know, Rupert, I think I've been to several symposia and so on. A couple of them at Tyringham, one of which you were at, that have focused in on this notion about the DMT entities, which some people encounter and some people don't. And, the discussion has been, are these real? And I'm not sure what that means in this context, but how do you gentlemen feel about the reality of the apparently non-human intelligences that we sometimes encounter in DMT states and psychedelic states? What is going on here, as you see it?
Well, I don't know if shamanic waterboarding would actually provide this experience, but DMT certainly does. For me, DMT has been the most important teacher. Mm-hmm. And the feeling of the experience is that it's hyper real, including the intelligent entities who are teaching you, who are revealing, who are leading you in a kind of exploration of the Paleolithic cave. So when Terence left us, we had already seen the beginning of the World Wide Web. We had websites, we had email, but we had not really envisioned the emergence of social networks, of social media. We hadn't imagined the penetration of smartphone technology all over the globe. So one of the interesting mathematical derivatives of this social network phenomenon on the internet is social network theory, a new branch of mathematics. And the idea builds on the neural networks, which are the foundation of neurophysiology and also artificial intelligence. The idea of the neural network is that you have these neurons, which are relatively dumb, and then you have the highly articulated interconnection through links short and long. The intelligence of the collective, the neural network, is based not on intelligence of the nodes. It's like termites. It's the network actually that has the intelligence, and it's based upon the distribution of bandwidth of these interconnections between nodes. So thinking of the human population of planet Earth, how it has been affected by this telephone revolution and the social media that are empowered by smartphones, that the interconnections of all of these nodes, that is individual consciousness, is greatly increased. The bandwidth of the connections, the number of connections greatly increased. So we're not foreseen this in the year 2000. But the possibility of the explosive increase in intelligence of the human species as a collective, occasioned by this technology, this is not virtual reality in the sense of 3D immersive video and sound. This is the virtual reality that we are participating in now. This crowdcast technology is truly amazing. Here we are, 7,700 people collaborating in this. Maybe we are seeing the scientific, technical, mathematical imitation of the neural network of actual consciousness, where there are conscious entities. This is the basis of my book, Demystifying the Akash, that these individual consciousness are linked up in a kind of a dynamical neural network. And the structure of this network as a hierarchical system of layers, each with long neurons projecting downward to the next. That this structure of the physical and supernatural neural networks is what is being revealed to us by these psychedelic trips. And the entities, they're not elves. They might be visualized as something that could exist in three-dimensional space and time, but they're not. It's truly higher dimensional. We always use that phrase without knowing what it means. Perhaps we are learning the structure of higher consciousness as revealed to mystics throughout the ages, including Tibetan Buddhists and Kashmiri Shaivites and so on. This is being revealed to us as a kind of amazing biochemical dissolution of Maya, of the shield of ignorance that has prevented us from understanding higher intelligence before. So Terence, if he were here with us now, I think would be marveling at the technology that we have that increases our intelligence, that goes so far beyond what existed before this amazing transformation in the 1980s, 90s, and recently. Technology which is not the research on psychedelics, which is not the biophysics of consciousness revealed through brain imaging and so on. It's the psychedelic education into the visualization of the higher realms. The elves are actually hubs. See, in neural networks, you have certain nodes have more connections than others. They function as hubs, like bus stations, train stations, and so on, radio stations. This station, cloudcast technology. So I think this would have fascinated him, and he would make contribution to it through an improved description of his own psychedelic experience beyond metaphors like machine elves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Terence used to speculate that there would be an emergence of some kind of cybernetic global intelligence, or kind of the externalization of the human neural network into a global, and that out of that some artificial intelligence would emerge that would lead the way into the singularity, and maybe this is what we're seeing. I mean, it must be said that certainly, social media has given us the power to propagate intelligence at the speed of light. It's also given us the power to propagate idiocy at the speed of light. So this is a good example of the two-edged, double-edged nature of these technologies. They can be used in a positive way and a negative way. But maybe this is a foreshadowing, of the future, that we will outsource much of our neural capabilities to the web, to the global network. Maybe that's a kind of human-machine symbiosis. I don't know. Rupert, what's your thought on this? You're the symbiosis expert here. What do you think?
Well, I'm slightly skeptical about this sort of intelligence of the web. I mean, most of the things that happen on social media and streaming on the web don't seem to me a higher level of consciousness or intelligence. It may be that mysteriously such a thing will emerge, but I have yet to see it. So I'm somewhat skeptical about that. I mean, I always was when Terence was a kind of techno-optimist, and I was always a bit skeptical of it when we used to talk about it in the 1990s. I mean, I think that something that I'd certainly want to discuss with Terence and Ralph, if we were having a conversation now, would be another aspect of expanding of our views of consciousness through panpsychism. That in the last 20 years, panpsychism, the idea there's some kind of consciousness all through nature, even in electrons and atoms, molecules, crystals, the idea there's some kind of conscious awareness or experience at many levels of nature. It's always been there. It's the animist worldview. It's nothing new about the worldview in itself, but it's become surprisingly fashionable. It would have been hard to predict this in the 1990s, that within academic science, philosophy, and neuroscience, there's been a resurgence of panpsychism among people who are holding down respectable chairs in respectable universities. It's no longer a kind of lunatic fringe. And this is now a major topic of serious discussion within the academic and scientific worlds. And so this really leads to an expansion of the area of dialogue. I mean, Terence was very interested in cephalopod minds, as I mentioned already, and already was fascinated by non-human forms of intelligence. But I myself, as again, Ralph and Terence and I discussed earlier versions of this, I myself think that if we're going to take panpsychism seriously, we need to think about the consciousness of things bigger than ourselves, not just smaller than ourselves, including Gaia, the Earth, and the Sun, and the whole solar system, and the galaxy. Is the Sun conscious? This is a theme I'm very interested in myself. And if so, what kind of thoughts does it have? Are they greater than our own? And do they vastly do they encompass everything that's happening on Earth, including the World Wide Web and humans and social media? Or is the Sun's mind at a fairly low level, mainly concerned with maintenance of its body and little else? I mean, and is the galaxy conscious? Is there a galactic mind? Are the different solar systems, all the stars, the billions of stars within the galaxy, are they like cells in the body of a greater organism? And if so, if there's a galactic mind, how does that interface with our own? How does the solar mind interface with our own? Through, presumably, mystical experiences, possibly psychedelic experiences. But we'd been encountering completely different kinds of minds that are not necessarily in higher or other dimensions. They're in the same dimension we live in. There are these beings throughout the whole of nature, which, if they have experience or consciousness, the realm of consciousness is vastly expanded beyond anything imagined by mechanistic materialism in the 20th century.
Yes, I think exactly. This is very interesting that, at this point, with the expanded knowledge we have about the neural basis of consciousness with all these technologies, it's kind of ironic, but maybe expected, that we should return to this archaic notion of animism, and yet with more of a scientific underpinning. I mean, I would call myself a panpsychist. This is very appealing to me. And what's interesting about many things about it, but actually panpsychism is potentially a view of animism that might admit of scientific validation in a certain way. There are ways to answer some of these questions, hopefully. Is the galaxy conscious? Is the sun a conscious entity? I'm not sure how you would approach that, but there might be ways to verify some of these things, and that would change our perspective dramatically, and would be very reassuring to me, I think, and many people, to the idea that there is something divine, if you want to use that term, beyond our normal sphere of perception. Because I think many people, are disillusioned with the usual religious perspective. That works for some people. Other people find it unsatisfying. Panpsychism may provide a way to admit of the divine, or maybe consciousness is a better term, being a fundamental principle built into reality. And do you have any perspective on that? Agree or disagree with that? Or what's your thought?
Well, I think yes, I think so. I think you see, we've had since the 17th century, there was a split between the realms of science and religion. Science got the whole universe, but treated it as dead, inanimate, and mechanistic, a machine,
right.
The world machine. And religion got God, angels, and human minds and morality, but they were treated as supernatural, outside the realm of nature, which functioned automatically, an automatic machine. So this was a great impoverishment of a religious worldview. In the Middle Ages, there was a kind of Christian animism in Europe, where nature was alive, God was working in and through nature. It was what's called technically panentheism, God in nature, nature in God. And God wasn't separate from nature out there. God was present in leaves and plants and animals and the earth and the stars. The stars and the planets were all living beings with intelligences of their own. And this is the worldview that gave rise to the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe. Then the 17th century sort of split that apart. So God was sort of taken out of nature. Nature was inanimate. The Romantic movement then said, well, wait a minute, nature's not totally inanimate. There's some real life in nature. And we got back the beginnings of a panpsychist worldview. And now we've got increasingly seeing this panpsychist worldview, recognizing the life of nature. There's many forms of consciousness. It's not just a machine. And as you say, we're returning to it in a higher turn of the spiral. It's not turning the clock back to medieval animism or or shamanic animism. We can learn from all these traditions, but we're in a different position ourselves.
Right.
So I think that then you see, if one sees the nature as alive, galaxies as conscious, the whole universe as conscious, then if we want to recover a sense of God, we get back to a sense of God as consciousness, not something that is just written down in books as a series of formulae or doctrines, but something that's experienced directly through mystical experience and through spiritual practices. In my recent 2 books, Science and Spiritual Practices and Ways to Go Beyond, I deal with 7 different spiritual practices in each book. And I think what's important now, what's happening today, is that many people are taking up spiritual practices, while either within or outside the framework of a religion. Meditation, for example, is something like 18 million Americans now meditate regularly. And 50 years ago, most people in America wouldn't have heard of meditation. And this is an exploration of consciousness, a direct experience of the nature of our own consciousness. And of course, there can be experiences through meditation which give insights into the nature of much more fundamental consciousness underlying all things, whatever you choose to call the ultimate consciousness, whether God or Brahman or the ultimate. So I think what's happening now is through panpsychism and through spiritual experiences, we're arriving at an approach which is experience-based. Psychedelics, of course, are very much part of this movement. It's experience-based, not just based on stuff in books. And that also means that we can, science is stuff in books, basically, or scientific journals. And why consciousness studies are important is because it's bringing experience back into science itself. And science, of course, is supposed to be based on experience. That's what the word empirical means. The Greek word for experience is empirical. Science is empirical, and so are spiritual experiences. They're both about experience. And what we're recognizing now about science is that the idea that it's portraying a totally objective world that's utterly unalloyed by human desires, emotions, prejudices, biases, is simply not true. Most scientific papers turn out to be not reproducible. It's the reproducibility crisis. It's a huge crisis in science.
Right.
Because science is a human endeavor. Humans see what they're expecting to see. Scientists publish their best results, not the worst results. And you get a systematic bias and distortion within science itself. Of course, we have to do our best in science, as in every other area, to be as accurate as possible. And then we get to, I think, a better way of seeing it. Instead of it being objective, as if scientists are looking on an objective universe through plate glass windows, we see it as intersubjective. If a lot of people can do similar experiments, get similar results, we build up a kind of consensus view of reality. And that's really what science is doing. I think it's better to recognize that than pretend it's producing something totally objective and utterly different from the subjectivity, which is the basis of the arts and culture and religion and psychedelic experience and so on.
Right. So, yeah, I liked what you said about empiricism. Empiricism means experience. And that goes back to all of these questions, these entities and so on. And I mean, you can take as a datum anything we experience is real. And in fact, that's the only thing we have is experience in a certain way. So whatever you're experiencing, it's real in the sense that it's experience. Whether it's objectively real or a construction of our own minds, or, I think there's a consensus that we more or less construct an artificial model or a model of reality that more or less corresponds to whatever reality is, but we can't know for sure. The model is good enough, it works for us, but we shouldn't give in to the illusion that this is actually an accurate depiction of reality. It's a model of reality our brains create for our convenience. And so I see Genevieve is back. She's keeping us on track. It's been an incredibly rich conversation. I'm very, and it could go on for hours, but we are not going to do that. We can get on to the questions, which are always the fun part. So are we ready to do that, Genevieve?
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that rich and potent conversation. Looking forward to getting into some of these questions. We've got some great ones today.
All right,
So
I'm sure you do.
The question is, I was hoping to hear some of your recent thoughts on shamanism, specifically its role in modern life and how it should be implemented. Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Well, Ralph.
Well, the problem I have with shamanism is that the shaman becomes respected as some kind of really authoritative source. Terence used to, it seems like he was advising everybody to have a psychedelic experience, but actually in his own life, he was demonstrating the best of shamanism, and that is some people must take an enormous risk in psychonautics and voyaging to higher realms or into closer communication with the souls of animals, plants, and so on, and at great risk to themselves, their physical health, their social life, and so on. And then to bring that experience back and represent it poetically somehow so that other people could get the benefit without having the risk. So this aspect of the shaman as a unique individual to do a certain job, I'm all in favor of that. And to some extent, we each have to be our own shaman. But there's some kind of a God gene or something in the human psyche, so that many times the shaman is elevated to a kind of a God-like status. And I'm not so positive about that.
Yes, I think I completely agree. I think we can be grateful to the shamanic traditions because they have shown ways to navigate these realms. I think it's a mistake. We cannot adopt whole cloth the traditions of indigenous shamanism. We can learn from that, but we have to develop our own shamanism, and that's, I don't even know if the word shamanism is appropriate, but we are in fact developing our own shamanic or neo-shamanic traditions. We're getting the tools to explore these realms that are not available or weren't available to indigenous shamans. And so they are learning, we're learning from shamanism, but we can't really be shamans in the traditional sense. So I think it's a mistake sometimes to try to just immerse yourself in the traditions. You can learn from them, but we're not indigenous. We're not coming out of those traditions. So that's my perspective. What do you think about this, Rupert?
Well, I agree with you, really. I think that, there aren't that many functioning shamans in the world today. We've destroyed hunter-gatherer societies, which is where they normally occur.
Right.
We've decimated the world of actual indigenous people who have them as part of their culture. And now, of course, there are a lot of people who are, you can train to be an ayahuasca ceremony leading shaman in an online course in a few weekends. There are an awful lot of people who call themselves shamans who are not.
Right.
And there's been an extraordinary sort of reflection back of, for example, Michael Harner, who did so much to popularize shamanism, was asked to Siberia because they'd lost their traditions, and he was giving shamanic workshops in Siberia. And then people who visited several years later found that the shamans there were using Hana-type drumming techniques. And the fact is that, from Esalen, it had gone back into indigenous cultures. So we're not dealing with pure, unchanged shamanism. We're dealing with something that's evolving in the modern world. And people claiming to be shamans who would not have passed as shamans in a traditional society at all.
Right.
And there's obviously a danger when you have a free for all, do it yourself, set yourself up as a shaman, self-employed model, because some people can abuse and exploit the power they have in that position, as indeed people who become gurus of any kind can. So, I rather agree with you. We can learn from these traditions. We can have people who are skilled at leading groups. That's very important as part of the whole, we'd call them workshops or something like that. We can have people who are guides and help and so on. But I don't think we can pretend that this is going to be exactly as shamanism was in indigenous cultures.
No, it can't be that. And I think it's important also to remember, as any powerful spiritual tradition, whether it's Eastern or cults, any kind of situation here, it takes extremely wise people to practice it correctly. There's great potential for abuse because there is a tendency to, I think there's a built-in impulse to, seek a framework for this. And if you find a framework that works, then there's a temptation to just stop thinking about it. You can just start something.
I wonder if
you didn't come about that honestly. You accepted someone else's framework, and it seems to me that psychedelics, one of the chief features, one of the chief virtues of psychedelics is it invites you to have your own unique experience, and that may be within a cultural context or something that you create, but psychedelics is actually a unique experience.
Dennis? Perhaps we should go on to another question.
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you for your thoughts on this.
What you
got? All right. So we have a question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what seems like an important balance. How do you respectfully navigate between transformative wisdom, perception received in psychedelic experiences, and grounding knowledge in critical dialogues, as for instance in science? And I mean respectful both within yourself and other people who may insist that, quote unquote, I just know has value that goes much wider than just personal. Does everything need to be tested? If so, how? Thank you.
I think I have to look at this question.
I think the question is really speaking to the balance of how do we both honor wisdom that is received in the psychedelic state along with grounded knowledge received through critical dialogues, and how do we weave those together, and where is the point at which something needs to be tested by science or it can be respected as its own download per se?
Well, maybe we don't. Rupert has written in his book Dogs That Know about scientists who deny that dogs can know, and at the same time have at home a dog that does know. So they go out the door, they put on the white coat, become scientists, and then they come back home, go in the door, and they become the loving person who communicates extensively with her dog. So it's a very difficult and possibly impossible task to merge these two worlds of knowledge.
Oh, well, I spend a lot of time trying to merge these realms of knowledge. In some areas, you can do experiments. I mean, I do quite a number of experiments on telepathic phenomena, for example. These are not psychedelic phenomena, but they're ones that aren't on the current materialist map of what's supposed to happen. And as Ralph said, I mean, one of my research areas with dogs that know when their owners are coming home, showing that these dogs seem to know telepathically when their owners are coming home, because if we film the dog, we have the person come home at a non-routine time in an unfamiliar vehicle. No one at home knows when they're coming, and the dog knows 15, 20 minutes ahead of time when it couldn't have heard or smelt the person, and starts waiting at the door. And you do it over and over again on film. And telephone telepathy is another subject I investigate, and I have a new telephone telepathy test that works on smartphones that I invite anyone to try. It's on my website, sheldrake.org. And this is the phenomenon where you think of someone and then they call, and then you think, it's funny, I was just thinking about you. The skeptics have dismissed this as mere coincidence for a century, but you can do empirical tests. How I do my tests is I have the person nominates 4 people that could call. We pick one of them at random, ask them to call. We film the subject. They have a landline without a caller ID. They know it's one of the 4 people, and they have to guess which it is before they pick the phone up. They say their guess to the camera. They're right or wrong. 1 in 4 chance, 25% chance of being right by just guessing. In fact, in these film trials, the hit rate is nearly 50%. It's massively significant statistically. So one can actually investigate these mysterious phenomena. Now, when it comes to psychedelic experiences, obviously there has to be a balance between, as this question asked, the kind of visionary insights, the direct experience, the vivid and direct experience, and the ability to bring that into dialogue with other people. I mean, not everyone wants to hear every detail of your mushroom or LSD trip. And some people can get into grandiose delusions about they've seen the ultimate truth and they're somehow uniquely enlightened. Well, you know, that way lies psychosis. And so it is obviously important to find a way of balancing these insights. And I think the kind of research that goes on in consciousness studies is an attempt to find a scientific balance between taking seriously people's direct experience and comparing it with other people's direct experience. You build up a kind of natural history of phenomenology. I mean, someone who's done this, for example, with ayahuasca is Benny Shannon, the professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who's taken ayahuasca many times, interviewed thousands of people, over 1,000 actually, and looked at visions of ayahuasca from paintings and art. And in his book, Landscapes of the Mind, you know, tries to map out this kind of experience. So that's an example of participatory research by an experienced psychologist, taking into account his own and other people's experience and trying to make build bridges between these different areas. So I think it is possible, and I also think it's very important, as this question suggested. I don't think it's possible to do direct experiments on some aspects of mystical experience, but there are areas of psychedelic experience that can be investigated. For example, I've suggested that when people invent new psychoactive compounds, a kind of consensus view of the experience has to build up, and this may depend on morphic resonance. It'd be a kind of collective memory of these experiences, and obviously it's not the moment now to get into the details of the experimental test, but this is experimentally testable. This is an idea that first came up in a discussion at Esalen, in fact. So in some areas it is testable. They're not always tests that would get grant approval in existing scientific institutions, but in principle, I think the realm of empirical science can be extended considerably further than it has been so far.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Rupert, can you speak to your experience of psychedelics and how they have shaped your understanding of the morphogenetic field?
Oh, I don't. I'm slightly reluctant to talk about this because I have many critics, and there's nothing they'd like more than to say that the morphogenetic fields are the product of a sort of mind addled by the Indian sun and by too much acid or something like that. But I would say that my ideas of the morphogenetic field as a form-shaping field in developing plants and animals didn't come from psychedelics. I was doing research at Cambridge on developmental biology. I worked on the molecular biology of plant development, and in fact, had sort of got some major new advances in hormone production and the way in which plant hormones are transported in the plant. So I felt that I was working with other people at the leading edge of developmental biology, and came to the conclusion that the molecular explanations would never be enough. There needs to be a more holistic view, and it already existed in the concept of morphogenetic fields that shape the form like an invisible mold around a developing plant or animal, or around a developing organ or cell. And this idea it's already been there since the 1920s in developmental biology. The big problem is how these fields inherited. I was sure it couldn't be inherited through the genes because they just code for protein synthesis and control other genes. And that's when the idea of morphic resonance came to me, a kind of direct memory across time. That wasn't something that happened under the influence of a psychedelic. Although once I had this idea of morphogenetic fields, if I looked at plants, as I did in the Fellows' Garden of Clare College, Cambridge, where I was a fellow, it's a very beautiful garden, and I could see the fields of the plants. And when I looked at flocks of birds, I could see the field around the flock. So I began to see these fields, and I mean, some would say this was a mere hallucination, but for me, it deepened my understanding of them by making this something I could directly experience. But the ideas themselves and the testing of the ideas came through a study of detailed biology, through studying biological theory, philosophical literature, all Western. I mean, my exposure to Indian thought really came after that. So I would say that it played a part, but I would have arrived at the basic ideas without psychedelics. It deepened my understanding of them, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a beautiful visual of that field around the flock of birds.
I think your observations about the morphic fields, morphic resonance, I remember some conversations. I think I may have been present when you and Terence were discussing, something like LSD or psilocybin has been around for a long time and part of our culture. And maybe that's one reason why the experience is so much richer, or often more richer than something that is created out of a test tube and has really no cultural roots, if you will. I mean, some of the Shogun compounds and so on perhaps are not as profound as some of the natural psychedelics because they don't have, or is that a legitimate thing to assert, or is that just crazy?
Well, no, I think by morphic resonance, if you take a particular substance or mixture of substances, like in ayahuasca, those have definable effects on nerve cells, brain activity, which means that you'll come into resonance with other people who've taken the same substance. Mm-hmm. And there'll be a kind of collective memory build up of that substance. So if, for example, it's something that's been taken widely in a shamanic society, like ayahuasca has, then the collective experience that's part of that collective memory of people who take it might include elements that come from their culture, like black jaguars and snakes of particular kinds, anacondas and things. So it'd be culturally flavored with things from that, the archetypal images from those cultures. And it was interesting when Claudio Naranjo was doing some research with ayahuasca amidst urban middle-class people who knew nothing of Amazonian cosmologies. They were having visions of jaguars and large snakes. Now, I don't think it's because the molecules create a jaguar image by interacting with a neurochemical receptor in the brain. I think it's because they're tapping into a kind of collective memory that comes from that culture. Now, LSD, first synthesized in the 1950s, also now has a rich cultural memory associated with it from the early research, the 1960s, San Francisco, the Summer of Love, etc., etc. There's a huge psychedelic art. There's a huge amount there. When I mentioned earlier the possibility of empirical tests of morphic resonance, I was thinking precisely of new drugs of the kind that Sasha Shulgin used to make, and actually studying how a field of experience, a kind of consensus reality, builds up, because it starts with no particular conditioning of any kind. And my idea for an experiment was that the first people who take it, you'd select out of 10 possible environments, one particular one select at random, say Japanese themed, as opposed to Indian themed or modern, super modern aesthetic and stuff. And then see if other people who took it later, knowing nothing about these previous people who've taken it, would start having the same kind of visuals and the same kind of aesthetic theming of the experience. That would be an empirical test. Of course, it's never actually been done, but in principle, it could be done.
Yes, it could be done. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
LSD and historical roots. I guess no one in this group needs to be reminded that tomorrow is Bicycle Day. April 19th is the anniversary of Hoffman's supposedly accidental discovery of LSD by ingesting it. And I guess there were many celebrations around the world for Bicycle Day. So we can all just give a nod off to a shout out to Albert for that gift that he made to humanity. Do we want to do one or two more questions?
Yep, so we've got some time. Ralph, we have a question for you. It says, I've heard clips of you discussing the intersection of computer graphics, mathematics, and the geometries of psychedelic space. Any insights, leads, or developments on that front that we should know about?
Well, not very much. As a frontier of art, as an art medium, computer graphic representations of psychedelic visuals has progressed amazingly. And the images we see, which are animated, brightly colored, spinning, two-dimensional graphics, those by Scott Draves have particularly impressed me, called Electric Sheep, after the novel by Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. His system is based on genetic algorithm and the participation of some more than 50,000 computer people worldwide. That you see his artwork as a screensaver on your computer. So when you stop working and you get up for a cup of tea, you come back, then Scott Draves' art is running on your screen. If you like it, you press the up button. If you don't like it, the down button. And this voting determines which of these electric sheep are allowed to mate in the future. So now this ongoing, some 20 years, I think, on the internet, has produced more and more impressive representations of DMT vision. Then there's also Stephen Rook, who uses genetic algorithms to make super high resolution animated images of the same sort. So as an art, combining computer graphics and the psychedelic experience, it does continue to evolve. And I know there are many other artists, probably millions, whose work I haven't seen. And it is so easy to program computer graphics. Anybody can learn to do it and seek representation of their own visions. But none of these, as I said, they just don't successfully represent the psychedelic experience, because that involves the conversations with angels, the exchange of information that these statically programmed animations can't possibly reproduce. But it's kind of a hermeneutical loop. You see, you have your experience, you try to represent it. Because of the representation, you then also experience someone else's vision to some extent, and that influences your own in your next trip. And then its representation and so on. This loop goes round and round, sometimes called the critical loop. And it's this loop which provides the drive toward evolution of art media. So it's a very interesting frontier. It continues to advance because the technology, especially the software, is evolving so very rapidly. It's quite difficult to keep up. More and more, better and better tools, easily learned from instructional videos on YouTube, etc., etc. Anyone can participate in this art and try to represent, just for their family and friends, something of their own experience that they know other people might not necessarily have.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ralph. I see someone in the text box
Thank you.
put up a link to the electric sheep. There must be other links too, but that was going to be one of my questions. Where can we look at this? And there's a link in the chat thread. So, Genevieve, one more question.
All right, so let's see. Just gonna find this one that had popped out at me. Thanks for your patience, everyone. And thank you for that insight into the inner workings of how technological art happens. It's beautiful to see that it does grow on its own by these different pieces of input. And I love that concept of the mathematic shapes, even in the screensaver, changing depending on people's appreciation of it. That's powerful. So we have a question about the 100th monkey. Based on morphic resonance, do you think it's possible that we could trigger a global change of consciousness by changing our own, and therefore at one point the 100th monkey would join the new perspective, therefore affecting entire collective consciousness? Might it be much easier than trying to convince and change perspective of every individual in a rational manner?
Well, the 100th monkey story is, for those who are not familiar with it, the idea that scientists were feeding monkeys on a beach in Japan with sweet potatoes, and then they learned to wash them, and finally when the 100th one learned to wash it, this bit spread to monkeys on other islands. And so the idea is there's a kind of spread of learning. Unfortunately, that particular story isn't really true in the way it's taught. I never use it myself as an example. It's a kind of myth, really, but it does illustrate the basic principle of morphic resonance. I prefer the 1,000th rat. If you train rats to learn new tricks, then other rats can learn them quicker. But it doesn't, there is data on this, which I describe in my book, The Presence of the Past. But it doesn't, the 100th monkey is a kind of step function. Nothing happens, then the 100th one, suddenly it all happens. In fact, the data on morphic resonance shows it's much more gradual. As more rats learn it, the more easy it becomes for others to learn it more quickly. Morphic resonance is a principle that says that if people have learned something in one place, it's easier for others to learn the same thing, happens more quickly or more easily. So it doesn't mean, though, that we can change the whole of human consciousness just by kind of massive firepower. All of us have the ability. It's like channels on a TV set. All of us have some decision. We're conditioned in some ways. We can make choices about which channel, as it were, we tune into, which TV channel we want to see. And you can make one particular TV station have a very strong signal. It makes it easier for people to tune into it. They get a clearer picture. It stretches further, perhaps, but it doesn't force them to tune into that. So I think that a large number of people changing attitudes makes it easier for others to undergo that same kind of shift in paradigm. In a sense, a paradigm is a morphic field of a way of thinking, a habit of thought. And when there's a paradigm shift, a new habit gradually, at first gradually, and then later more rapidly, becomes a habit of thought and takes over from the old one. And we're seeing a number of these paradigm shifts right now, including a paradigm shift out of mechanistic materialism, still the orthodoxy of the sciences, but into a more panpsychist and holistic way of thinking. We're in the middle of that kind of paradigm shift right now. So I don't think that one can overpower people just by thinking intensely about some desirable goal, although I think that there is some influence of our thoughts on others. But if we were concerned about, sheer firepower of numbers, unfortunately, the habit that's growing fastest in the world today is consumerism. We've exported consumerism to China, to India, to Africa, to everywhere in the world, together with sort of capitalism, advertising, and so on. This alienation from traditional ways of living, the breaking with traditional worldviews, conversion to a modern capitalist consumerist worldview is going on for billions of people today, and it's very fast spreading. And I think it's one of the reasons underlying the great problems that we have with the environment and in the world today. Morphic resonance is morally neutral. It can help new and beneficial habits to spread faster than they might otherwise. It can also reinforce older or undesirable habits. We have some choice about not only what we say and do, but the way we think, and that can influence others by morphic resonance. But I don't think there's a situation where if 1,000, 1 million, or some fixed number of people think something, then suddenly there'll be a phase change and the whole world will change. The Hundredth Monkey story grew up in the context of the peace movement, the anti-nuclear movement. That's when it first took on a kind of common folk currency. And it was interesting that the metaphor it's based on is essentially that of a critical mass, the very metaphor on which nuclear bombs are based. It's not really a critical mass phenomenon. All the existing data on morphic resonance suggests that it's a quantitative phenomenon. The more rats that learn a new trick, the easier it will be for others to learn it, rather than a sudden jump. So there's some truth in this basic principle, the 100th Monkey story principle, but it's nothing like the way it was portrayed in the anti-nuclear movement, and the way it has a continuing life of its own today.
Right. Do you see any?
I disagree,
okay.
Rupert. I don't disagree with the science of rat knowledge. I just want to say I do believe that a thought by a single person could precipitate a massive phase change in global civilization. I think Albert Einstein's idea of general relativity, that energy and mass curve space, or Wassily Kandinsky and the breaking through to an abstract expressionist art medium. I met the Dalai Lama just a few years back in Bangalore, and he was on this obsession with compassion. This thought, if we all spent 2 hours every morning meditating on compassion, not all, but even a certain number, like in the Maharishi effect, that would actually affect an outbreak of compassion as the renaissance of an old habit in human population. He's no dummy, the Dalai Lama. He has a lot of experience with meditation. He thinks it has some power. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to be too pessimistic about the possibility of a major cultural transformation coming soon.
Well, we could certainly wish for a phase change toward compassion. I mean, we could use that right now. I wanted to ask you, Rupert, do you see any evidence that conventional science is a little more friendly to your notions about morphic resonance, or are they reject it out of hand in spite of the considerable evidence that it's a valid principle?
Well, the thing is that within conventional science, morphic resonance is still a kind of red flag taboo topic. That means that people know that they might endanger their career or their prospect of getting grants or promotion if they advocate it publicly. So most people don't advocate it publicly or try and teach it in undergraduate courses or anything like that.
Right.
In private, people's opinions are entirely different. I mean, there's a reign of fear within science where it's so competitive for grants and promotions and so on. People don't want to step out of line. Young scientists, many of them have taken psychedelics. They have a view of consciousness that's very different from mechanistic materialism, the orthodox doctrine still. But they're not going to say that in public. And so there's an enormous interest in holistic thinking of more the kind of rebirth of nature paradigm within science. But people are not going to say this in public. I know this because I have a lot of correspondence with scientists, and I know many are very friendly towards morphic resonance and these kinds of ideas. But they very often say, you know, I can't mention this to my colleagues. It's kind of underground still, which is a shame, because if it were more above ground, then more people could get grants and more research could go on in this area. But the people who are most against it and who are most against the topics I do research on, like telepathy, psychic pets and that sort of thing, are the mechanistic materialist, the activists, so mostly militant atheists who want to preserve the mechanistic materialist worldview. And they're quite successful in making sure that this worldview is the only worldview taught in science courses in universities and in schools. And they have their supporters. For example, there's editing wars on all the time on Wikipedia, where the dominant area in these areas, the people who dominate are the kind of mechanistic materialist worldview people. So they try to maintain a kind of orthodoxy. But actually, research on morphic resonance has been going on for 25 years. It's summarized in the latest edition of my book, A New Science of Life, retitled Morphic Resonance in the US. There's, I think, a serious possibility that this is becoming much closer to reality in biology, because the old view that everything's determined by genes, which I was having to struggle with in the 1970s and 80s. I was saying, you know, genes are grossly overrated and there are other forms of inheritance. Well, now that's generally recognized. It's now recognized that genes are grossly overrated. The Genome Project was a terrible failure in many ways. I mean, it sequenced the genome, but the idea that you can predict everything on the basis of genes isn't true. And it's now called the missing heritability problem. And also, since the year 2000, there's been a great rise in research on epigenetics, the once taboo subject of the inheritance of acquired characteristics, or Lamarckian inheritance, is now mainstream and has been rebranded epigenetic inheritance. And now people are doing research showing remarkable effects. One of my favorites is experiments with mice. They make male mice afraid of a smell of a chemical called acetophenone. They give them shocks when they smell it. So very soon they're very frightened of this. Then it turns out their children and their grandchildren are terrified of the smell of acetophenone. The paper in Nature is called Inheriting the Fears of Fathers. Now, this would have been unthinkable in the 20th century. And it's called epigenetic inheritance. No one knows exactly how it works, but this is just the kind of thing that could have a component of morphic resonance in it, you see. And this research is now flourishing and is one of the most exciting areas of biology. So though no one is calling it morphic resonance and so on, that all sorts of really interesting results are now coming up, which I think have a morphic resonance component within them. And that currently I'm doing a review of the epigenetic literature and designing experiments that tease apart molecular epigenetics from morphic resonance effects. So this is very much at the cutting edge of biology at the moment. So I think things are changing, but they're not changing under the banner morphic resonance. They're changing with different names. Just like epigenetics doesn't usually say this is Lamarckian inheritance, the inheritance of acquired characters. It's been rebranded, and therefore it's much easier for people to accept. So I think the situation's more hopeful than it's been for a very long time, but it's not necessarily explicitly branded as morphic resonance.
That's very good. Thank you. That is, that's very insightful observation on sort of the way that institutional science progresses. And it's unfortunate that there is this hierarchy of what is accepted, and anything beyond that is branded as heresy. But I have to think of what Schopenhauer said, one of my favorite phrases. He said, all truth goes through three phases. At first, it's violently opposed. Secondly, it's ridiculed. Third, it's accepted as self-evident. And I think this may be what's happening with concepts like morphic resonance. So let's just hope that the search for truth continues, because this is, in its purest form, this is what science is. It's the search for truth. It's a way to ask questions of nature and get sensible answers back that you can validate. But then too much of science is not, I think science, science is caught in this institutional matrix, lose sight of that. In the midst of the frenzy of publishing papers and getting grants and, being scientists, they forget what the mission is. And the mission is to increase our understanding. That's why the McKenna Academy is the Academy of Natural Philosophy, because I think natural philosophy, the precursor of science, has not quite, science lost a lot when it became committed to reductionism and quantitation and all that. There are other ways of knowing, and that's why your work is so amazing, so interesting. I think maybe we're done. I mean, we could go on. But you've been very generous with your time, both of you, and we were going to try to hold this. So unless there is something either one of you want to say or some burning question in the question thread, maybe we can close it here. What do you think?
Well, I think we could close it here, but I'd just like to say thank you, Dennis, for taking the initiative, and for your and Genevieve and others who've made this possible, because I think it's very important to honor Terence's memory. He's had a lot of influence on a lot of people, including, of course, me, and on younger people as well. I mean, it's surprising when I visit universities how many people in their late teens, early 20s are familiar with Terence's work. It's perennially interesting to people for good reasons. And so I'm very glad we've had this chance to honor him and to remember him. And I think his inspiration will live on for many, many years.
I believe it will. Thank you both for participating and taking time. Do you have any closing thoughts, Ralph?
Well, thanks for everything. It's a pleasure to be reminded of the wonder of Terence.
Thank you all so much. Today has been incredible. I think earlier in the talk, Rupert, we had mentioned that sheldrake.org is a good place for people to find out more about your work. Ralph, I would love to know, where can people find more of your line of study?
Just Google my name. My website is called ralph-abraham.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
We really appreciate both of your time. I'm going to bring Rupert and Ralph off screen. And Dennis, I'm wondering if you have any final words that you'd like to say. I've got a few announcements and then an explanation of the breakout sessions and whatnot. But if you have any final words you'd like to add. This has been such an amazing series, and thank you so much for bringing us all together in this way.
Yes. Well, again, I want to thank everybody that helped organize this, Genevieve and Seth and Danielle and Christina, the people behind the screen who make it happen, and I really appreciate that. This series of dialogues, these events will live online for a while. You can go back and listen to all of them or any of them. So they'll have their own life on the web, not unlike Terence, who is still out there, as many of you know. And as Ralph and Rupert mentioned, he's still very much an influence. It's always surprised me. But again, not really, how many students I run into who were not even born when Terence was at the height of his career, and yet they found his work, and it's been an inspiration to them. So I think on behalf of the McKenna Academy, we'd like to thank everybody that participated, and we seek your feedback. We're very interested in your ideas for future events. One thing that this has been, having to go virtual as we've done, has been a real eye-opener for me. We were originally going to do this as a conference in San Francisco, and that couldn't happen. So it's been an eye-opener for me in terms of the potential of these virtual technologies to reach out. And we're seeing this community take shape. And it's all of your participation that's making that happen. So I just want to give you profound thanks for doing this, and visit the McKenna Academy website if you like, www.mckenna.academy, and give us your ideas and support us, and let's keep the conversation going. So very much profound thanks to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you, Genevieve. No breakout sessions this time.
We do have breakout sessions this time. So I'll be explaining that, and just really want to say thank you again to everybody who has participated and showed up through this couple-week tribute. It's been amazing to honor Terence's legacy, which was, I really feel, one of sacred curiosity and a reverence for the interconnectivity and the magnificence of this universe we live in. And we would like to offer you, the community, a special gift. We're actually going to extend this tribute to offer another program. Stay tuned. We'll have the date on that upcoming. But we would like to offer a class on cultivating a relationship with mushrooms. Seth Warner of Myco Rising and the San Francisco Psychedelic Society will be generously offering this free mushroom cultivation class. He will start out with an interview with Dennis. They'll be talking about Dennis and Terence's time at La Chorrera and how that led to the Magic Mushrooms Grower Guide. And it's amazing that we're able to really continue along in this vein of legacy, because Seth attributes his inspiration for learning about mycology to the McKenna brothers. He'll also be giving a brief overview on the science and walkthrough of a very accessible start to finish, from spore to harvest process for cultivating. And really, I think in this class, you can expect to learn more than just how to grow mushrooms, but learn about cultivating a sacred relationship with mushrooms, and that through the process of learning how to care for them and bring them into the world, we can deepen our understanding of their medicine, of their teaching. So stay tuned. We'll stay in touch with you via this mailing list, via social media and whatnot, and let you know about that upcoming date. And let's see, I just following along with Dennis's gratitude, I just really want to honor gratitude to Terence. Thank you, Terence, for the incredible impact that you have and continue to have on so many people and gathering us here today. Thank you, Dennis, for the foundational contributions that you've given to this movement, to our awareness scientifically, and our respect for the biosphere. And thank you to all of the speakers who generously donated their time, wisdom, and knowledge to come and honor this tribute, both of Terence's legacy and this world that we live in. So it's a really special thing that we were able to come together. Thank you to the community as well for being here. It's really, I think, especially in these times of pressure, we find that our ability to come together and support each other allows us to get through just about anything. And I just want to leave everybody with a kind of a question to sit with as before we move into these breakout sessions. As we celebrate the evolutionary progression of consciousness, it's made possible by the lives and contributions of our predecessors. In honor of the founders who have propelled us to this point, how can we contribute to a legacy for future generations? I know that every single one of you has an offering and a gift inside yourselves, and it's beautiful that we come together in these settings to really help realize those gifts and support each other in doing so. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna bring up an instructional graphic on how to get to the breakout groups. We're going to have some really amazing discussions. They are hosted by San Francisco Psychedelic Society volunteers, and you'll see them on different topics. So let's see, I'm going to just bring this one up. Thanks for your patience. So at the top of your screen, you're going to see a schedule, and then it says the name of the session, Rupert Sheldrake and Ralph Abrams. If you click on the more ... at the top of the screen, it's top left on a desktop and just the top of the screen on mobile, you'll be able to come to a drop-down menu where you'll see many sessions. This is where you'll find replays of previous events. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see about 6 different breakout groups that you can access. Feel free to go back and forth between them. Just a couple notes on what you're going to want to do once you get into those breakout groups. You'll want to comment, say hi or something so that the moderator knows that you are there. And then if you would like to participate in the session and come up on screen, you can say, raise your hand, and that will alert the moderator that you'd like to come on and join the conversation. And let's see if there's anything else that we need to know about that. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them in the main chat box. Again, we appreciate you so much. Please stay in touch. And again, any feedback on your favorite moments of Terence or future offerings that you would like to see, please let us know. We exist to help further the consciousness of community. And so this only exists because we're all here. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the breakout sessions.